Husband's family laughed at black woman. She destroyed their empire by pulling us $1 billion investment. Golden light shimmered across crystal chandeliers as the Vexley family's winter gala unfolded beneath a ceiling of glass and pride. Laughter rang through the hall like polished silver, bright, brittle, and cruel. Near the grand piano, Amara Sinclair stood alone in a gown the color of midnight. She moved with quiet grace, her smile faint but unreadable. Conversation softened as she passed. Whispers rose in her wake, laced with envy and judgment. A blonde socialite lifted her champagne flute, her words floating just loud enough to sting. Philanthropy must be exhausting for people who never really belonged here. A small ripple of laughter followed, delicate, rehearsed, and poisonous. Amara's hand tightened around her clutch. The soft click of her phone camera almost vanished under the orchestra's waltz. A flicker of light reflected against her glass. Subtle, deliberate, unnoticed by everyone else. Across the room, Charles Vexley offered a nervous smile that never reached his eyes. He sipped his drink instead of defending her. And just like that, his silence said more than any insult ever could. The camera of her mind recorded every detail, every smirk, every word. As the music swelled, her phone vibrated once against her palm. A quiet message blinked on screen. It begins tonight. 3 winters earlier, Amara Sinclair had arrived at Ironwood Hall, the ancestral Vexley mansion that seemed carved out of privilege itself. Its corridors echoed with portraits of pale ancestors and gold-framed legacies, none of which bore a face that looked remotely like hers. The housekeeper had smiled too long when she first introduced herself. The butler had bowed a little too shallow. That was the quiet beginning of her education in what the Vexleys truly valued. The family called her a beautiful addition. They said it with gracious smiles, but their eyes held the message clearly enough. She was not one of them. At every dinner, every gathering, Amara sat through conversations that praised tradition while cutting her out of it. Charles's mother often spoke about heritage, her tone sweet as poison, while Amara's every gesture was quietly measured, every word analyzed. She learned to perfect silence, a defense they mistook for humility. At the first gala she attended as Mrs. Charles Vexley, one of his cousins had leaned in and whispered, "You must be so proud to have come this far." The words were wrapped in admiration, but lined with contempt. Amara only smiled, letting her diamond earrings catch the chandelier's glow, the same way she would learn to catch every insult and turn it into armor. Charles had tried in his own fragile way to bridge the gap. But he was a man raised on quiet compliance, born to inherit, not to question. When his mother made subtle comments about keeping the family image pure, he had looked away, pretending to hear nothing. And when his friends smirked at his choice of wife, he drowned his discomfort in politeness. His silence became another kind of betrayal. Behind closed doors, Amara built a rhythm of survival. She began documenting everything, the clipped remarks, the side glances, the business discussions she was not meant to hear but did. Her phone became her silent witness, her laptop an unseen fortress. Every email, every note, every transaction she came across during charity planning or company dinners, she saved it all. They believed she was a graceful ornament, unaware of the family's financial maneuvers. But late at night, when the mansion's halls fell quiet, Amara sat beneath the soft hum of her desk lamp, poring over spreadsheets and trust documents that Charles carelessly left open. She understood the subtle pattern, the transfers from Vexley Industries into shell accounts under Ironwood Holdings, the real estate donations meant to hide unpaid taxes. Each new discovery reshaped her silence. It was no longer surrender, it was strategy. Outside, she played her role perfectly, hosting charity luncheons, signing thank you cards, smiling for photographers beside Charles, as if she truly belonged to that glittering world. But every glance she exchanged with the staff, especially those who watched her with a quiet respect, reminded her that appearances were her only weapon. In those moments, she missed who she had been before, the sharp, ambitious woman who built her own consulting firm before she ever met Charles. That version of herself had been fearless, but the Vexleys had turned her life into a slow erasure, one polite conversation at a time. They made her doubt her place until she started to question her own reflection. She remembered the night it changed. It was a dinner party in spring, The guests were laughing about a socialite scandal, and one of Charles's sisters said, "People should know where they belong, no matter how much polish they buy." The table went quiet, just long enough for everyone to know who the remark was aimed at. Amara had simply lifted her glass, her smile steady, her heart breaking quietly beneath her silk dress. That night she began counting. One day for every insult, every moment she had been dismissed or diminished. One day for every silence she had swallowed instead of speaking. She wrote the first number, Yerisand, in the corner of her notebook. By the time winter returned, the number had reached 1095. 3 years. 3 years of listening, learning, enduring. And through it all, she built something no one saw coming, a quiet network of knowledge and leverage. Because while the Vexleys believed Amara Sinclair had surrendered her power, she had only buried it deep enough to rise again when the time was right. And that time was coming. The night of the winter gala lingered in Amara's mind like a bruise that refused to fade. Laughter still echoed faintly down the marble corridors as she slipped away from the ballroom and stepped into the mirrored calm of the upstairs bathroom. The air smelled of roses and polished stone. Her reflection stared back at her, composed, unshaken, but no longer patient. She set her clutch on the counter, unlocked her phone, and scrolled through a folder labeled Ironwood. One message waited half-written. Her thumb hovered for only a moment before she finished typing. Activate Phase 1. Across the city, in a minimalist glass office overlooking the skyline, Elijah Grant received the message. The faint blue glow of his monitor lit the calm intelligence in his eyes. A quiet man with a sharp mind, Elijah had known Amara since their college days, back when she still believed in fairness. He read her message once, nodded slightly, and typed a single reply. Understood. The next morning, the first ripples began to spread. At dawn, in the offices of Ironwood Capital, a name whispered in boardrooms with respect, a small team began reviewing its portfolio. A few keystrokes here, a document flagged there. On the surface, it looked routine. But in the world of finance, subtle movements could shake empires. Ironwood's analysts began to withdraw exposure from Vexley Industries, not all at once, just carefully enough to draw no suspicion. By mid-morning, market screens flickered with mild confusion. A few brokers frowned, exchanging messages about an unexpected dip in long-held Vexley positions. Probably just rebalancing, one murmured. Happens all the time. But none of them knew the real architect behind that quiet tremor. Back at Ironwood Hall, Amara moved through her morning ritual as if nothing had changed. She descended the grand staircase in an ivory robe, greeting the staff with a soft smile. The housekeepers admired her grace, never guessing the storm she had already set in motion. At breakfast, Charles glanced over the financial section of the newspaper, brow slightly furrowed. Strange, he muttered. Ironwood Capital seems to be shifting assets this quarter. His mother looked up from her teacup. Ironwood? She said, frowning. They have always been steady. Perhaps they know something we do not. Amara's hand paused over her spoon, her expression serene. Markets change, she said gently, sometimes without warning. Charles nodded absently, unaware that the change had started in his own home. Later, while the family prepared for another charity function, Amara retreated to her study. The curtains filtered pale sunlight onto the mahogany desk, where her laptop waited, the same one she had used for years under the guise of social correspondence. She opened a secure window, watching digital lines move in synchronized silence. Funds were redirecting, trusts were being reevaluated, and control was beginning to shift, piece by piece, away from the Vexley family. There was no triumph on her face, only calm precision. The power she had buried for years was finally breathing again. Every figure on her screen represented a fragment of dignity reclaimed. By afternoon, whispers began circulating in the financial press. Ironwood Capital announces internal restructuring. Minor movement in Vexley stock observed. It was nothing dramatic, nothing that would raise alarms. But for those who watched closely, it was the first sign of an unseen hand rearranging the chessboard. Evening settled over Ironwood Hall in quiet splendor. The chandeliers glowed softly as servants prepared dinner, and laughter drifted faintly from the drawing room. Amara stood by the window, gazing at the snow beginning to fall over the gardens. Her reflection in the glass was calm, serene even, but her eyes held the glint of purpose. She turned back to her desk, the faint hum of her laptop filling the stillness. Her files were open, each labeled and color-coded with surgical precision. As the final document uploaded, she whispered under her breath, almost like a prayer, "Let the numbers speak." And somewhere in the city, those numbers had already begun to rewrite the balance of power. The following morning dawned with tension sharp enough to taste. The calm rhythm of the Vexley estate shattered beneath a chorus of vibrating phones and unanswered calls. In the breakfast room, sunlight spilled across half-eaten plates, while 3 generations of wealth stared at screens flashing in disbelief. Vexley Industries, down 18%. The numbers glowed crimson across every device. Financial alerts screamed through the room like silent alarms. Charles stood at the head of the table, tie askew, phone pressed to his ear. "This is temporary," he said to no one in particular. "A technical correction. It will stabilize by noon." But the tone in his voice betrayed him. Even the servants paused, sensing that something irreversible had begun. His mother demanded explanations, her pearls trembling at her throat. 18%, Charles? "That is not a correction. That is a collapse." Charles turned toward his father's old portrait, as if it might offer guidance. His voice cracked as he repeated, "It will recover." The television in the corner flickered to life, a news anchor's calm voice slicing through the air. Reports indicate an unexpected institutional retreat from Vexley Industries, with Ironwood Capital leading the withdrawal. Sources suggest a pending review of the company's ethical practices. A collective silence filled the room. The word ethical hung there like an accusation no one could touch. By midday, panic rippled through the markets. Investors demanded answers. Brokers flooded Vexley headquarters with calls that no one could return fast enough. Shareholders wanted statements. The company's PR team drafted and redrafted official responses that sounded confident and meant nothing. Behind the scenes, Ironwood Capital released a carefully worded statement. As part of our ongoing commitment to ethical realignment, Ironwood Capital is reassessing all partnerships to ensure compliance with global standards. Those words detonated like a bomb in the financial world. The phrase ethical realignment implied rot beneath the marble, corruption hidden behind the Vexley family's pristine image. The next morning's papers carried headlines that burned like fire. Ironwood abandons Vexley. Insiders speak of misconduct. Investors flee legacy empire amid ethics probe. The internet followed with cruel efficiency. Old interviews, charity galas, even family photographs were dissected frame by frame. Someone found archived employee complaints, small grievances that suddenly seemed prophetic. Journalists began connecting dots, some real, some invented. Charles spent his days pacing the length of his office, sleeves rolled up, hair disheveled, voice hoarse from endless calls. "This is sabotage," he muttered again and again. "Someone is doing this to us." His board members began to distance themselves, citing fiduciary duty and reputation management. Through it all, Amara Sinclair remained a picture of quiet composure. She still attended the charity luncheons. She still smiled for the photographers outside the mansion gates. But in the evenings, when the world went silent, her phone vibrated once. A message from Elijah Grant. "Elijah. Phase 2 complete. Media cycle holding steady. Amara. Good, let them chase ghosts." Her reflection glimmered faintly in the darkened window as she watched the first flakes of snow fall. Every whisper, every insult, every look of condescension that had haunted her for 3 years, all of it had found its echo now. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere grew brittle. Servants whispered in hallways. The Vexley sisters canceled social engagements. Charles began drinking more, his charm unraveling in public. Even his mother avoided the press, afraid that one misplaced word could feed the flames. One evening, after another failed call with the board, Charles found Amara standing in the study, reviewing documents by the soft glow of her laptop. The fire behind her cast long shadows on the floor. His voice shook as he spoke. "Do you know what's happening?" he demanded. Amara looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. Her voice was calm, each word deliberate. "Consequences," she said softly, closing the laptop, "are never random." The silence that followed was heavier than any confession. The empire was cracking, and she had not even raised her voice. The storm finally broke, not with thunder but with headlines. By morning, every news channel carried the same flashing banner. Government regulators launch formal investigation into Vexley Industries. Anchors spoke with careful urgency, their words measured, but their eyes bright with the thrill of scandal. Outside the Vexley mansion, reporters gathered behind iron gates, their cameras catching every flicker of panic that passed through those glass doors. Inside, the once proud family sat around a long mahogany table. The same room that had hosted decades of celebration now echoed with unease. Lawyers spoke in low, urgent tones, sliding documents across the polished surface. Charles's voice rose above the chaos. "What does Ironwood have to do with this?" he snapped. "They were our partners." A junior lawyer hesitated before speaking. "Sir, Ironwood Capital's ownership structure has just been disclosed." At that exact moment, a phone buzzed on the table. A breaking news alert lit the screen. Elijah Grant's official press release. Ironwood Capital, founded and solely owned by Amara Sinclair, has divested from Vexley Industries following an internal review revealing unethical practices and financial misconduct. The words fell like glass shattering in slow motion. No one spoke. The air itself seemed to recoil. Charles's mother stared at Amara as though seeing her for the first time. The patriarch's portrait loomed above them, suddenly meaningless. The legacy they had worshipped was now crumbling at the feet of the woman they had once treated as decoration. Charles stepped back, color draining from his face. His voice broke. "You did this?" Amara's expression was calm, almost tender. She rose from her seat, smoothing the sleeve of her silk blouse. "You taught me patience," she said quietly. "I learned precision." Her words hung in the air like a verdict. Outside, the world exploded. Screens blazed with new headlines. Vexley Empire implodes after secret fund withdrawal. Ironwood founder revealed, the woman behind the collapse. Justice or revenge? The story of Amara Sinclair. Social media flooded with disbelief, admiration, and outrage. Clips of her past appearances, her grace at the galas, her silent smiles beside Charles, now played with new meaning. Every frame looked like prophecy. In the mansion's corridors, assistants packed documents, phones rang without answer, and security escorted nervous executives out the back gate. The Vexley sisters argued with PR advisors, their voices breaking under pressure. Amara moved through it all with the quiet composure of someone who had already said goodbye. She walked upstairs, opened her wardrobe, and began folding her clothes into a leather suitcase. No tears, no hesitation, only purpose. Charles appeared at the doorway, his eyes desperate. "You will destroy everything my family built." Amara looked up, meeting his gaze. "I did not destroy it," she said softly. "It was already hollow. I just stopped pretending it was gold." Downstairs, news vans lined the street. Reporters shouted questions into the wind as the gates swung open. Amara descended the steps slowly, rain beginning to fall in delicate sheets. The marble beneath her heels mirrored her reflection, calm, composed, unbroken. The camera of the world followed her, every step a statement, every breath a reclamation. Behind her, the mansion that once symbolized power now looked smaller, fragile under the gray sky. She reached the waiting car, paused and turned slightly. The rain caught in her hair like light. Then she stepped inside, the door closing with finality. The empire she had once been forced to bow to was collapsing, not through violence, but through strategy, intellect, and grace. And as the car pulled away, her reflection in the marble floor lingered, a silent mark of victory that no storm could wash away. Days passed, and the storm did not fade. It only settled into silence. Television screens still glowed with breaking news banners, but the tone had changed. The Vexley Empire, once untouchable, now stood under government control. Class action suits piled up one after another. Their stock had fallen to dust. Cameras lingered outside the empty mansion gates. The lawns were unkept, the windows dark. The great house that once hosted charity galas and political dinners now stood still, a monument to quiet ruin. Far from the chaos, in a high-rise office overlooking the city skyline, Amara Sinclair sat in calm light. Her new office was clean and minimal, glass walls, soft gray tones, no symbols of luxury. Just order, focus, and peace. Files lay open on her desk, not about revenge but repair. She reviewed settlement papers for the employees who had been silenced, signing each one with steady care. Former workers, wronged and ignored, would now receive what they were owed. She transferred funds to whistleblowers who had once risked everything to speak up. Their courage had been buried beneath Vexley's arrogance, and now it was being restored, with interest. Every act of fairness she completed felt like a quiet restoration of balance. Elijah entered the office, his usual calm smile in place. He set down a file, glanced at the screens showing the latest reports, and said, "You dismantled them without breaking a single law." Amara looked up, her eyes warm but distant. "It was never about revenge," she said softly. "It was about truth." For a moment, silence filled the room. Not the cold silence of fear, but the stillness that follows justice finally being served. Outside, the sky was clearing. Light spilled across the skyline, touching glass towers that once belonged to others. Now one of them belonged to her. Across town, the Vexley mansion remained closed, its gates chained. Reporters had stopped coming. The world had moved on. All that remained was the echo of what had once been power, and what power had done to those who thought they owned it forever. Amara stood by the window, watching the city breathe beneath her. The background score of her life had changed, no longer sharp and tense, but calm, resolute, and strong. She turned back to her desk, closing one final folder labeled Ironwood Legacy Fund, a promise that what was built next would be fair, inclusive, and honest. The world outside kept moving, unaware that its balance had quietly shifted, and at the heart of that change stood a woman who chose truth over vengeance and grace over ruin. 6 months later, the world knew her name. A glossy Forbes magazine cover turned slowly on the screen, bold letters reading, "Amara Sinclair, the woman who redefined justice." The article called her a visionary, but behind that calm smile was a story of patience, endurance, and truth, the kind that did not shout, but changed everything. Her new initiative, the Ironwood Empowerment Fund, had already pledged $50 million to support underrepresented entrepreneurs. The same woman who had once been mocked for not belonging was now opening doors for those who were never invited in. A soft montage unfolded. Young founders shaking hands across simple office tables, small factories reopening, women signing contracts with pride. Hope began to look like something practical, structured, funded, and real. Elijah's voice echoed faintly in memory. "You dismantled them without breaking a law." He had been right. Amara had not destroyed for the sake of revenge. She had rebuilt for the sake of justice. Now she stood by her office window as dawn painted the city gold. The skyline stretched wide, no longer a fortress that excluded her, but a landscape she had quietly reshaped. The camera lingered on her reflection in the glass. Her face was calm, eyes steady, as the first light touched her. A single line appeared on screen. "Dignity is silent." But silence, when armed with truth, can shake empires. The music faded into stillness, not an ending, but the quiet beginning of something greater.